Hello, and welcome back to another update where we cover the latest developments in the Palestinian-Israeli war, where according to the latest reports, the Palestinians still have territories captured since the start of the war under their control. The Israelis continue pushing them, but they are unable to advance further than the last reported positions, according to the latest updates. So the claim that they have fully managed to recapture all of the positions is false, and they are exaggerating their victories because the Palestinians are still able to contest some of these villages and are fighting through them. There's also reports of fighting returning to Nahal Oz, which is right here to the east of Gaza. The Palestinian fighters are fighting in the direction. We're also seeing some fighting in the gray zones here to the north. The Sderot area is still not fully cleared by the Israeli forces, and the Palestinians are also here in the southern parts. So while the fighting is ongoing here by the Gaza border, the Palestinians have also managed to advance in the direction of Rahat, where some units independently have managed to move in that direction and reach there, and fighting was reported there. We've also seen some fighting by Jerusalem. And in the northern parts, the Israeli forces have actually infiltrated Nablus during the night. As we see in this video here, we see that the Israeli forces have entered the city during the cover of the night with some of the armored vehicles and are doing some operations there during the early morning as they are trying to gain the upper hand by surprising the population here. There are some Palestinian resistance movements here in the city of Nablus, and most likely they are targeting them. And in the general developments of the front line, we see that there's heavy bombardments of the Palestinian positions in Gaza, and this was shown by multiple videos of constant bombardments. According to the Israeli military, they have announced that they were taking about 100 airstrikes every hour, and they also claim that every single pilot in the Israeli military volunteered to go and fight in this war. So they have full staff in the Air Force going full strength already now and trying to completely level Gaza to the ground and then follow it up with a ground invasion. In response to this, the Hamas organization started first with, for every airstrike without warning the civilians first, they would get rid of one of the hostages. But so far, there's been no evidence that they have done so, despite the continuous bombardment. So this was most likely just to scare off the Israeli military and try to make them hesitate for a moment, because they've used this hostage taken as a major part of this motivation to fight this war. However, the issue here is for the Israelis that they have to go through the streets of Gaza to do so. First off, they don't know where they are, and then they have to go through these cities to actually get to them. Meanwhile, the Hamas were expecting this to go as it has gone. According to the official statements from the spokesman of the whole operation, he says that the Palestinians are fighting with about 4,000 soldiers across the front line, and that they have about 36,000 in Gaza. So they have the vast majority of the soldiers within the city. But this also means that with the 300,000 mobilization of the Israeli army, we're seeing approximately 500,000 against 40,000 soldiers. So that is over a 10-to-1 advantage, which by military theory is what is needed to conduct a proper siege. And at the same time, we are seeing that the Israelis have cut all water supplies as well as electricity and lights out of Gaza. This means that they're now isolated with no water, no food, no electricity throughout this siege. There's always the gap here between Israel and Palestine and Egypt, where the Egyptians can pass through some of the checkpoints between Gaza and Egypt. So the question here is, how will the Israelis deal with that, as the only way that they could physically stop would lead to war. Responding to this whole conflict, the Saudi Arabians decided that they would stop with the negotiations to normalize ties with Israel, and most likely we'll see other Arab Muslim countries doing the same, as some of them have normalized relations with Israel, and as such we may see the return to the time before these normalizations. Meanwhile, we're seeing a Israeli buildup not just against the Gaza Strip, but also in the north in the direction of Syria and in the direction of Lebanon. The reason for this is that the Israelis hold Syrian territory here in the northeast, the Golan Heights, and they are also fighting against the Lebanese, especially the Hezbollah organization. So with the risk of the war escalating here in the north, they have used the US presence of a supercarrier being sent in the direction of Israel as a measure to discourage further involvement from the northern directions. So we are seeing that the Israelis are essentially preparing to fight not just Gaza and the West Bank, but also Lebanon and Syria with the air support of the United States, if they decide to get involved themselves here in the north. But there's many issues with the Israeli deployment of units here in the north, which clearly shows that they haven't learned anything from the Russian-Ukrainian war. According to a speech made by one of the Israeli commanders, they said that drones are essentially completely useless and they'll just use their electronic warfare to get rid of them in case they encounter them. So the Israeli army has not incorporated drones into their own doctrine, which, if you have seen my coverage of the Ukraine war, that is a huge mistake. We've already seen Palestinian quadcopters dropping grenades and destroying tanks in the Israeli army, and these electronic warfare systems have not helped them then and will not help them in the future, because the amount of drones being used in these conflicts will significantly skyrocket. So if they cannot hold back against a couple of drones, how will they hold back against thousands of drones? And here in the north, against Lebanon and Syria, they would encounter fights against thousands of drones, if not tens of thousands of drones. We've also seen reports that Hezbollah are claiming that they have 250,000 missiles, which is why we're seeing the Israelis ask the United States for additional supplies for their military systems of the Iron Dome system, and also requesting Patriot missile systems and additional military systems to fight against those missiles. So moving back to the deployment of Israeli vehicles here in the north, we see multiple pictures as shown on screen of the Israeli artillery and tanks and armored vehicles and so on being gathered in small areas in close proximity, and the ammunition right next to the artillery. These are all completely vulnerable to any sort of explosion. If a drone flew by and dropped a grenade, all of the ammunition would blow up and the artillery piece would just get blown up. And if one of the 250,000 Hezbollah missiles hit one of these ammunition areas, they would just completely blow up. So they are making themselves extremely vulnerable based on the historic warfare that is conducted by Israelis, where the last real war they actually fought was in 1973. The rest were not actual wars, and this one is not yet an actual war, as the Palestinians do not have nearly the same capacity and capabilities of the Israeli army based on the equipment and so on. As the Israelis are conducting 100 airstrikes in an hour, the Palestinians have no airplanes. So this is the difference between the two armies, yet the Palestinians have managed to perform extremely well with the fact that they have yet, of the third day, they have yet to be pushed out of the areas they took on the first day. And this is beyond all expectations. Anyone with a sensible understanding of military theory would understand that the Palestinians would most likely have been pushed back already on the first day. But instead, we're seeing that on the third day, the fighting is still ongoing outside of Gaza. This is because the Israelis have so far been unable to push them back, despite a 10-1 advantage. So, despite the initial drawback, we all expected that the Israelis would then go back to what we were expecting them to be prior to the war, but we're still seeing that the army is severely underperforming based on its reputation. Instead, the only thing we're seeing of the Israeli army actually performing well is their air force, but their job is only to bombard Gaza, which doesn't really require much. So in the end, we are seeing that the Israeli army, despite severely underperforming, are still willing to go on with this invasion. because they are of course confident with their 10-1 advantage and their air superiority. However, we're seeing that based on the talks by the official representative and spokesman of the Hamas movement, we're seeing that the Palestinians were expecting this to happen and were actually expecting to get pushed back earlier than what is actually happening. They were expecting the Israelis to be stronger. This means that most likely either he's crazy or he is actually planned this accordingly. They are expecting the Israelis to launch a ground invasion, and that is what they want. And based on this, we have knowledge that the Hamas movement has built extensive tunnel networks all across the Gaza area. That means throughout the whole area, not just it being a urban war, it is also going to be one where the Palestinians have underground tunnels, they have bunkers, they have prepared fortified positions, all of this to help deal with a Israeli ground invasion. Their plan is most likely to hold out as long as possible to attrit the Israeli army and make it as painful as possible and make it as drawn out as possible for the Israelis to continue this war. This will most likely be aiming to essentially recreate the Chechen wars by making a long and drawn out war in the urban areas to just try and prevent the Israelis from actually capturing the city by slowly and surely grinding down their forces and their combat capabilities. If they manage to grind them down enough, then they may see support from other areas, and as such, the United States would get involved and it would become a major regional conflict. So most likely the Israelis will, in this case, try to win as fast as possible because that would be in their interest, while the Palestinians would most likely try to grind down the Israelis as much as possible until that they get tired of the war, and then they will try to make some peace treaty that is favorable to the Palestinians. So most likely this is what the Palestinians are aiming for, what Hamas is aiming for, a long and drawn out war that makes it too costly for the Israelis, and then create a peace treaty that is favorable for themselves, while the Israelis are here just trying to end this war as fast as possible, but so far it's going horribly. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.